Hey, what's up, comrades? So, I decided I'm gonna read through all the X-Men comics, starting with the earliest one, and then talk about it here. Just go over it, right? So, I'm gonna read through each one of these and do like a short synopsis, and then I'm gonna merge them all into one video based on the story, right? So with X-Men, we got like the original run, and then we have like Inferno and the Dark Phoenix saga, all that crap. So, and I'm gonna base the merging of the videos on how it's organized in the giant torrents that I found of all the comics. So whoever, what's his name, that put this together, which you can just Google it and get it yourself if you want. That is what I'm basing this on. And then I'm going to throw a bunch of AA art on top of it for each one of the issues that we go over. All right, so starting with The Uncanny X-Men Volume 1. So this is a pretty good one. It gets us started. It introduces all the characters. It introduces all their powers. We get the main villain, and then they have like a little interaction, and then it ends. So we get like, it's a very good first issue because it establishes all the characters, or like the main characters and the main antagonist. It kind of like helps you establish the world, and then it shows us like how they're utilized and how they function, and it gives them some foibles and stuff. So we begin with the four boys and Professor X. So Professor X comes off just from the start as like very stern, and like looking at it from like a modern perspective, which it's 2024, you might be like, man, this guy's kind of an asshole. But looking at it from like the 1960s, it's just like that's how like strong men were, right? That's just like a teacher role. They're just very stern, very like, okay, no nonsense. This is what we got to do. You're young men, so I got to take a very draw the line kind of thing, which is better than the way a lot of teachers do things these days, right? Where they're very like, oh, we got to talk about it and bullshit. But with boys, especially, like these are young men who are like, I think Iceman is 16, and then the rest of them are like 18, so they're on the cusp of adulthood, and most of them they're kind of wild, so he's got to like rein them in. So let's start with Professor X. So Professor X is a telepath, as in it's established in this first issue, and we'll address as things change as they come up. But so starting now, he's just a telepath. He's in a wheelchair. That's not explained. He can read people's minds, and he can send them thoughts. That's all that he can do at this point. He can also control. There's a plane in this issue where that he can remotely control with his mind. All right. That's not explained. That's fine. All right, so then we have the X-Men. To start with, the four boys, there's not really like a leader or anything designated, so Cyclops is obviously the leader at a later point, but in this first issue, we just get introduced. So you have Iceman, which he looks like a snowman when he's transformed to his ice form in this first one. He can create ice stuff, and mostly he does ice shields, and he's cold. People are really cold around him. Then there's Beast, and this is Beast before he turns blue, right? So he's just a big guy with very acrobatic, and he's very, he's very strong. I don't think he's established as being strong in this. No, he kind of is. It doesn't say it explicitly, but he grabs like a missile out of the sky. But he's like an acrobat. He's very acrobatic in this. Then there's Warren Worthington III, who's Angel. And I'm going to start just referring to them by their nicknames because it's faster and easier. Angel has angel wings, and he can fly. He's very maneuverable. He seems like to be extra fast and extra like nimble because they're in like the danger room, which is where the X-Men do their training, and he's able to like go in and out of like a fan essentially pretty easily. And then there's Cyclops. They call him Slim Summers. He's later designated as Scott Summers, but for the first issue, he's just Slim. So good old Slim. He has laser eyes, but he's able to control it with his like optic visor, how much power he wants to give out. And so the boys all practice. We see all their powers. We see them bantering with each other. Boys will be boys kind of situation. And then Professor Xavier, I don't think they call Professor X. They just call him Professor in this. So if the Professor is like, oh, we're getting a girl to come in, and all the boys are like, ooh, boysy, time to get it in. They're very like 1950s, 1960s, kind of like, hey, darling, or what do they call her? Dame? They don't call her Dame. It's not that old. Oh, man, I can't remember. They use like a very old timey doll. Hey, doll face, and she's like, hey, boys. And she's supposed to be beautiful. She's got like kind of short red curly hair. Her power is to move things with her mind, right? Telekinesis. And so one of the beasts tries to like make a move on her, and she like throws him, and everyone like teehees. All right, and so then we kind of switch over to, and then Professor Xavier says, I might be the first mutant who's ever existed. I'm gathering mutants because they're being prejudiced against so that we can help fight the evil mutants. And then it's like, oh, there's evil mutants? Oh, yeah, there's evil mutants. Then we meet Magneto. Magneto has the power of magnetism, which is like, in this first issue, is like whatever the fuck he wants to do, he can do. Like, it does have something to do with like, oh, the metal from the guns and the tank and other stuff. Because essentially he's like, oh, ho, ho, I'm super dastardly evil. I'm going to do some crazy stuff. And he takes over this like army base by just like waltzing himself in there, and he can like manipulate things, and it's completely ridiculous. Anyway, so all the general and all the people at the base are standing outside when Professor Xavier is like, oh, we got to go help these guys out. So he sends them on their first mission to test out their abilities. And so they head out there, and excuse me, they head out to the base. It's like Cape something. And they're like, give us 15 minutes and we'll take care of this. We're the X-Men. And they got their like fancy yellow and blue outfits. And the general's like, fuck it, whatever. So they go in there and they fight. Cyclops is able to use his visor to like, or his laser vision to punk through like the magnetic barrier. And then they go in there and they're able to fight Magneto. And then Magneto causes like a missile. He does something with like a lot of fire and stuff, but then Iceman's able to create like a shield for them, and then Cyclops is able to like use his laser vision to dig a tunnel underneath the ground, and then they come back up and they punk him a little bit, and then Magneto like pieces out, and they're like, all right, and then they go out, and the general's like, wow, that was less than 15 minutes. You guys did a great job. It's like, you can have this back. And he's like, well, I don't know what the rest of the world thinks, but we will always remember the X-Men as being great heroes. And then the professor's like, good job, guys, we did it. All right, that's the first issue. Cool. All right, so the second issue of the Uncanny X-Men stars the bad guy, the Vanisher. Now, you may not be familiar with the Vanisher if you're familiar with the X-Men. I am not familiar with the Vanisher. I vaguely remember him from the back in the day when I read through these. My homie and I got like omnibuses of the X-Men, the Uncanny X-Men, like years ago. So I read through this at some point. His power is kind of nebulous here. It seems like he's able to not vanish, but teleport to another location instantaneously. And so we see him conducting some nefarious events, and then he, getting like a name recognition for himself. And we also see him meeting up with a bunch of like hooligans, gangsters and stuff in someplace. And then he goes to like the Pentagon and tells them that he's going to come back later and steal some like grand military scheme. Now this takes place in the heart of like the Cold War, right? So then he's going to use that demand a ransom for the plans, or he's going to give it over to the Ruskies. Meanwhile, do we see on this? Meanwhile, the X-Men are doing something, and then in their uniforms, like we don't know what, because it just starts with them like rushing back to someplace. The school, we have to assume, right? The X-Mansion, which hasn't been fully established as like a place thus far, because they're being summoned by Professor X. And we see everybody like, Angel is like flying back, but then he gets tuckered out, and all these like groupie babes are like trying to get with him, and then Marvel Girl, Jean Grey, pushes them aside and puts them in like puts them on top of like a movie theater so they can go see a movie. And because we learned that Angel, like, he can fly and he can go fast, but he tires himself out pretty quick. And we also learned that Marvel Girl, when she tries to lift things, like, using the telepathic powers for things that she normally can't lift, like, physically, is very draining as well. Because they're still all, like, learning how to use their powers and, like, develop them and whatnot. Iceman, what does he do? So anyway, so they head back. Oh, that's right. So Beast just, like, runs on walls and ceiling, and he's like Spider-Man's it, essentially. He just like jumps and leaps from building to building to get back to the X-Mansion, which again is like not out in like the country thus far. It's just like somewhere nebulous. And then finally, Cyclops and Iceman get distracted trying to help some construction workers who are like they're demolishing a building and a ball is about to fall on them, so they help them with that. And then they like rent an ice cream truck or give some money to an ice cream truck to deliver them back to the X Mansion. So anyway, so when they get there, they learn about the Vanisher. And so they go to stop him from taking the plans, because remember, he threatens to take the plans, and then Professor X, or he's not called Professor X yet, just the Professor, shows them this thing, so he sends them out to stop the Vanisher. They try to stop the Vanisher. They are unable to. They're like, man, none of our stuff worked. He just kept teleporting around. And even when Iceman like froze the briefcase he was with the plans in it, the Vanisher just like pooped. So he can clearly vanish more. He can teleport more than just himself. So then Charles, I don't think he's named Charles yet either. So then the Professor is like, all right, I'm going to go with you this time and show you how to take care of this. It's time for me to enter the fray. And so they see from like a TV broadcast, and everyone's like, oh, the X-Men suck. They can't do jack crap. They're weak. They're worthless. Right? Just because they didn't capture this guy that no one's been able to capture. Anyway, you got to remember, and when I was reading this, I was like, why didn't they talk about like the Avengers or Fantastic Four? And it's like, oh yeah, all these things came out at the exact same time. Like there's an advertisement in the second issue for the Avengers second issue. Right? And the Fantastic Four probably, I think they came out like right before this. So all these kind of things, there's like the Golden Age, or there's like this, whatever. There's like the original Marvel superheroes, which are like Captain America, the Flaming Torch or whatever. What do they call him? I can't remember. Anyway, but these are like World War II, and then there's like a huge break, and now we're like in the 60s, I want to say, or early 70s, I think. Yeah. Anyway. So then Charles shows up, and then the Vanisher shows up with all his goons, and so they got their Tommy guns or whatnot, and there's like a standoff, and then the Vanisher's like, oh, you X-Men think you can stop me? You couldn't stop me before. You're pathetic. And then like they stand aside, and the Professor rolls up in his wheelchair and is like, they're not going to stop you. I'm going to stop you. And the Vanisher's like, oh, you're just some human. You can't beat Homo Superior. And then the Professor's like, I am also a mutant. Behold. And the Vanisher starts taunting him, and then all of a sudden he's like, wait, who am I? Oh, I forgot why I'm here, what I'm doing. And then the X-Men like very gently like lead him away. And then the goons are like, hey, don't you take our boss away. And so then we get to see the X-Men fight them off, and then the military shows up, and they're like, hey, old man, what are you doing here? We got to keep you safe. Come with us. And then the X-Men are like, oh, we'll take care of this old man, don't worry about it, because no one saw the professor use his powers because it's all in his mind, and no one saw him roll up there at the X-Men, I guess, either. So good stuff. So then the Professor essentially just like mind wipes the Vanisher to beat him. And thus the X-Men are victorious once again. Good stuff. So the next great villain, or the villain of the week, I guess you could say at this juncture in the X-Men series, is the Blob. So the Blob, let's see, what's going on? So the kids are all hanging out being kids, being adult children in the 1960s. When Professor X is like, X-Men, come to me. I have found a signature for another mutant somewhere. I need you to go look. And then there's like a race, because I guess whoever gets to the Professor first gets to go with Jean Grey. And even though, and then we find out that Cyclops is jonesing for Jean Grey or Marvel Girl, but that he's concerned about his powers for some reason. Like, oh, this dreaded blast of death in my face. And we also find out that Professor X is also in love with Jean Grey. Oh, and then obviously the other three, Angel, Beast, and Iceman are all crushing on Jean Grey. But Cyclops and the Professor are in love. Oh, my love, I can never tell her my true love. So anyway, she clearly prefers Scott. Or he's not called Scott yet, I don't think. They call him Cyclops and they call him Slim. I don't think he's even called Summers at this point. I think they called him Slim Summers at some point. So they haven't. I don't think they've named Iceman. I don't think they haven't given most names. You have Jean Grey, Warren Worthington III. I don't think we got Hank McCoy yet for the Beast. We may have, and I don't think we've got Bobby Drake for Iceman either. And I think they've called Cyclops Slim, but they haven't called him Scott or Summers. That's so interesting. Anyway, so she's about to go off with Cyclops when Angel grabs her and dashes off and gets in his like Rolls Royce or his big car, and they drive off. And then Iceman and Beast are like, "Mrr," and so is Cyclops. So then Beast and Iceman go, and everyone else goes to kind of look for this guy, and there's like some misadventures there. But Cyclops ends up at a carnival where he finds the Blob, and the Blob puts on like an exhibition. Not him necessarily, but the circus puts on an exhibition for him where they like, I'll give $100 to anyone who can move this guy. And remember, this is like 1960s $100, so it's like $1,000 or more in today's money. With under certain economic leadership, it's probably like $10,000 to be completely honest. Embarrassing. So he is unmovable, and then they shoot guns at him, and he just absorbs. He doesn't absorb, but he just like eats. He takes the bullets, and like, they don't do anything, and everyone's like, wow. And so then Cyclops meets with him in his trailer afterwards and is like, hey man, you should come be an X-Men with us. And he's like, ooh, I'm so mad at you. And then Jean Grey and Angel show up, and Angel's like, hey, sorry about my glum chum over here. You should come with us. And the Blob is like, oh yeah, with this hot dame, I'll definitely come. And then he like takes Marvel Girl's hand or arm or something, and then Cyclops like shoots him with his ray, and he's like, what the heck? And it's like, oh, you guys are mutants too. So anyway, so they go back, and the professor like gives them some examinations, and then they do some tests with him and whatnot, and then they're like, you should be an X-Men. And he's like, no, I don't want to be. I want to be in charge of this whole place. And they're like, no. So they kind of drive him off, but the professor's trying to wipe his memory before they go, because it's like tried and true methods. Like with the Vanisher. But for some reason, it's much more difficult with the Blob, not because he's more intelligent or has psychic defenses or anything, but reasons. So then the Blob goes back. Now that he realizes he's a mutant and he's Homo superior, he goes back and he takes over the carnival or the circus. And he's like, we're going to go invade the X-Men and steal all their technology and stuff like that. And so they do that. And the meanwhile, the professor's trying to build... He realizes this is happening, so he builds a device. Or he's building a device to amplify his psychic energy so he can mind wipe like everybody, like everyone, so no one knows where they're at or who they are or any of that stuff. So then we see we get the first hint that the Beast is actually very smart, because he's in his room like studying like a book called Advanced Calculus, right? And then Bobby's just screwing around in his room, and when a giraffe comes in, he's like, what? And then so the invasion begins. So there's some battles with the X-Men and the various crews, and the Blob and his little army of circus peoples are able to essentially knock everybody out, capture everybody using like various circus things like aerobatics. They have like a gorilla. There's like, just like, it's like a circusy attack. It's very, how do the weirdos say it? It's delightful. Because it is. And then Blob and company, they come in. They're like storming into the mansion when the professor hits Jean Grey up, or Marvel Girl, and is like, hey, you have telekinetic powers. Use them to like free yourself. So she takes the blindfold off her head, and then she gets a knife and cuts herself, and then cuts her bandages, or her like rope, and then rescues everyone else. And they charge in there and they fight the carnival crew some more as Professor finishes his device and uses it and mind wipes everybody. And then they're like, oh, what are we doing here? And so they all go back to do carnival stuff, and the Blob is just going back to doing his show, and totally forgot that he's a mutant. But then the professor gives dire warning. He's like, oh, that worked for now, but who knows if the power of the mind will overcome my blocking, and the Blob will remember. But for now, the X-Men have succeeded. So yeah, there you go. So next up in our story of the X-Men, we have a divergent story. So from Tales of Suspense number 49, which is kind of Iron Man's book before Iron Man did Iron Man, we have the tale of Angel as he accidentally gets struck by some nuclear radiation waves or rays or something. That Tony Stark is he's doing some test at one of his factories, and when Angel gets hit with these waves, he turns him evil. So then he fights with Iron Man, beats him, goes back to the X-Men, fights with them, is able to escape and be like, I'm done with you X-Men, I'm going to go be an evil mutant now. And then he finds some dynamite and tries to get the evil mutants to contact him. Oh, and for the first time, I feel, in this whole series, we get the school is in like Westchester, New York, and it's Professor Xavier. We get the full name, or I don't think he says Xavier. I think it's just Professor X, but he calls him Professor X. And then we see like the connection between the worlds and whatnot. And Angel's actually like really it establishes that he's very fast, very maneuverable, and his wings can do a lot of stuff because Bobby or Iceman puts him in like a ice prison, and he uses his wings to break out of that, and he's able to like move faster than Jean Grey is able to use her telekinetic powers, stuff like that. So what eventually happens is that Iron Man essentially grabs. They like fight in his factory again at the end, and Iron Man takes him all the way to like the stratosphere where his like power suit wears off because it's not like the modern Iron Man who's like got unlimited energy. His stuff like runs out of juice, and so it runs out of juice, and he begins to fall to his death. And Angel's like, good, and then Angel's like, no, I feel bad, I can't do it. So he goes and rescues Iron Man, and kind of like breaks the power of the nuclear rays, becoming a superhero again, or a good guy. And then the X-Men are very grateful, and Angel's like, well, if you ever need anything, Iron Man, let me know. And then Professor X reaches out to Tony Stark and is like, thank you so much for saving my X-Men. We owe you a great debt of gratitude. So it's a cute, fun little story there. So next up, we have the return of Magneto with his little crew of evil mutants. What do they call themselves? They call themselves like the League of Evil Mutants or something. So ridiculous. Anyway, we get introduced to Quicksilver, which is a speedy mutant. His sister is the Scarlet Witch, who uses hex powers. Both these guys will later join the Avengers, and there's like a weird relationship with them being Magneto's children or not. I'm sure we'll get to it eventually. Then we have Mastermind, which for anyone who's familiar with the Dark Phoenix saga, he's one of the main antagonists there. Right now, he's just a creepy looking dude who casts illusions. And then Toad. And Toad is kind of like Beast, where he's just got like athletic powers, but he's also kind of like a toady. Get it? And he loves Magneto, the great leader Magneto. So Magneto, we meet all these guys, and they bicker and fight. And Quicksilver really doesn't want to be a part of this, but Scarlet Witch feels like she owes Magneto her life because wherever they were from, she was being treated like a witch, and they were going to burn her at the stake or whatever. And Magneto rescued him, so she feels some loyalty. Also, Quicksilver hates humans, but he doesn't like the way Magneto operates. Magneto goes and he steals this like brand new destroyer, and then he uses that and Mastermind's ability to create grand illusions to take over this small country and start ruling it. When he also has a conversation in like they don't call it the astral plane, but essentially Magneto connects with Professor Xavier's mind, and they have like a little convo about what's going on. And Magneto essentially is like, I don't understand why you choose Homo sapiens over us. We should work together, not against each other. And Professor Xavier's like, no, we're here. We're gonna save mankind. And so Professor Xavier and the kiddos, they use their like, oh, we're a school on vacation to get into this country that's just been occupied, which is like part of the plan, I guess. And then they kind of split up to try to get in there. So Beast climbs up a wall, then gets knocked down by Toad, and then Mastermind makes him think it's a glass wall, so he falls off. Angel's able to get past a bunch of guards, but then he gets ousted by Quicksilver, but then he tricks Quicksilver into running into a wall before Scarlet Witch hexes him into defeat. Cyclops comes to save them, but Quicksilver knocks him out. There's almost like an explosion or something, but then Iceman or Cyclops uses all his powers to like knock this thing out a window, and then Iceman comes and saves them. They then get attacked by Marvel Girl, who saved Beast from the fall, and then they're all like finally together. But then Mastermind uses like a fire illusion to trick them into thinking they're going to burn to death. before Professor Xavier shows up and is like, "Oh, you were just being fooled. Of course I didn't fall for it because I'm the master of mind." They then chase after Magneto, who's got this great plan. First of all, he has a bomb on a door leading to where they're at. So the X-Men are going to hit that, and then once they hit that, there's going to trigger like a nuclear bomb that's going to blow up the whole country. Meanwhile, they're going to escape on their little destroyer thingy. So Professor Xavier is too late to warn Beast not to open this door, but instead he is fast enough to leap in front of Beast and take the full brunt of the force. Then Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are not cool with killing a bunch of innocent people. So when they're escaping, Quicksilver runs back and gets rid of the fuse for the nuclear, like kind of stops nuclear bomb from going off, and then like pieces back out. So then the X-Men just watch them leave, and Professor X says like he lost his mutant powers, quote unquote, and he's like, "Oh no, I've lost my mutant powers. You'll have to do this on your own," and that's where we leaves us off.
So the follow-up to the previous issue is another Magneto and the Evil Mutants game we play. So Professor X is still not able to use his powers, supposedly. And we get a lot of... Oh, we meet Jean's parents. They're like in town because they're traveling somewhere and they wanted to stop by and meet everybody. So they do. And it's very pleasant, and they're very pleasant. And then we see Mastermind's out looking for the X Mansion, and it's the same neighborhood, but he can't find it for reasons. So we go to the introduction of Asteroid M, which is... I forgot it was this early, to be completely honest. So Magneto has an asteroid. He has his base on, and everyone's up there, and they fight because they're evil, so they can't like ever get along or do whatever. And then Magneto decides he's going to send Toad out to draw the X-Men out. So Toad goes and wins a bunch of like track and field events before the X-Men come to like rescue him, because people are like very upset that he's winning everything, so they feel like there's like shenanigans afoot, which there are. So they rescue him, and they're taking him back like on the subway or something, and then Beast is like, "Wait a second, this is Toad," and he like, or it might have been Angel. Anyway, one of them like tears off his like face mask, and it's like, "Aha!" And then he tries to escape, and then Magneto and crew come, and there's like a little fight, and Angel gets captured, but Toad also gets captured, and then the X-Men are trying to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, Angel's being tortured by Magneto with like sound and all this crazy stuff. It's pretty bad. And it's like, bro, this guy can't get a break. The nuclear thing with Tony Stark, and then this. Poor Angel. It's kind of a future ahead, too. If you're tracking any of that. We'll get there someday, I'm sure. So we also get some more of Hank being like, I wish I could just be intellectual and not be a beast in this, which is setting up his whole thing with the Avengers and whatnot, which we'll get to. So, but for now, they... Toad starts acting really funny, and then he summons like a contraption to get him back up to Asteroid M, and then all the X-Men like pile on it, and so they'll go up to the asteroid, and they hit in there, and then the fights begin anew, and Magneto's using the asteroid to like fight them, like because it's all metally, but then they're able to like eventually get... Oh, and then we get a lot of like Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver being very like distraught that Magneto continues to want to just like kill people wantonly, and they're like not a part of that. And then Cyclops and I think Jean Grey like try to talk him into joining the X-Men or divesting themselves of Magneto, and they're like, we don't like him, but we don't like humans either. So they eventually end up with the Avengers. I don't remember when that occurs, but obviously the movies. But the movies are accurate, as in they spend a lot of time with the Avengers. Anyway, I don't think they leave just yet. So they're sticking around with Magneto. Magneto like blows up part of the asteroid and locks Cyclops into like a thing where he's gonna like be in outer space, so he's gonna die. But then Angel and Iceman combine their powers to create like an ice chute, which keeps Angel from freezing to death or something. And then they're able to rescue Cyclops. And they take like the same contraption down that they took up. And once they get out, it heads back up. And then they head back to the X Mansion. And Professor Xavier's like, you all did great. And they're like, well, how do you know we did great? And it's like, because I was faking not having my powers. And you've all graduated. So what that means, no one knows. But we'll find out in the future. Next up, we get a visit from the Fantastic Four. Well, actually, Iceman goes and visits the Fantastic Four, or mostly Human Torch. So Bobby Drake is sad because he didn't get a chance to ask Jean Grey out. Professor X is like, hey, maybe you should go to New York and just chill out, party. So then Bobby finds a flyer for like a teenage cruise or something. So he goes and he meets Doris, who's the Human Torch's girlfriend, and they chat for a little bit. And then shortly thereafter, pirates attack and take over the ship. So the Human Torch and Iceman team up to beat them off and drive them out. And then Iceman at the end is, well, that was fun. Hopefully someday I can find a girl.
So next, the X-Men once again have to battle with Magneto and the Evil Mutants. But this time, we're bringing in Namor, the Submariner, who is the original mutant from the good old days with Captain America and the original Human Torch and such. So both Professor X and Magneto decide that they need to try to recruit Namor to help battle each other. They both go into the astral plane, or whatever. They haven't officially called it that yet, or whatever. And then Professor Xavier decides he's going to wait, let Magneto make the first move, and then follow suit. So he does. Magneto puts it in the head of one of Namor's people to betray him by telling Namor to go meet up with Magneto and then take over the kingdom while he's gone. That's never followed up on, at least in this comic, so whatever. So Namor does. He goes and meets up with Magneto. Those who don't know Namor, he's extremely arrogant, super powerful, strong, can fly. He's usually a Fantastic Four villain at this point because he's in love with Susan Summers. He likes beautiful women and will do anything for them. And so Magneto decides to use the Scarlet Witch to kind of lure him into doing what he wants, which sort of works, except that Magneto's a big a-hole right now. So when he mistreats Scarlet Witch, Namor essentially fights Magneto. Meanwhile, the Professor Xavier figures out where they're at, rents a sailboat, and they all sail over there. So Magneto destroys the boat with the power of magnetism, a giant magnet that he's created. And the usual thing that goes on with these, they fight, give and take. The X-Men, once again, kind of defeat Magneto and his crew. The Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are I don't know if we should really be following Magneto, but we have to because we owe him something. The X-Men question that. Namor ends up fighting the X-Men, but then fighting Magneto, and then eventually Magneto runs away with everyone, Mastermind, Toad, Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, and Namor goes back to Atlantis and is like, I'm done with these humans. I'm done with these landlubbers. And Scarlet Witch is a babe, but I think I've learned my lesson from Sue Summers. And that's where they leave us for now. We then have the return of the Blob. So what happens is the X-Men, they graduated from their schooling as high school students. I can't remember what they call it, charm school or something. And they also graduated X-Men, but their X-Men diploma is blank because obviously no one can know that they're X-Men because they got a secret. And then Professor Xavier is like, hey, cool guys, well, you're good. You can do this on your own. I'm going to go do something. I'll see you later. And they're like, wait, what's going to happen to us? It's like, I'm going to choose one of you to be in charge. And if you're familiar with the X-Men at all, you realize it's obvious that he chooses Cyclops. But if you're coming in this blind, then yeah, he chooses Cyclops, who's the most, not dour is the right word, but he's the most serious, and he's got the most leadership qualities. So then we get introduced to Cerebro, which I think he calls Cerebrus at one point. I think he calls it both, but it's based on cerebellum or something. Anyway, it's the machine that Professor X uses to find other mutants. But he obviously, quote unquote, doesn't need to use it, but he built it so that the person taking over for him, who was Scott Summers, who was 18, maybe 19, that he can use it to track other mutants. But it's a secret. Shh. So don't tell any of the other X-Men. All right, so then the other X-Men come in. They're like, oh, it's too bad Professor Xavier's gone. Something. Let's grab Scott and get out of here. And we get introduced to Greenwich Village, which is a place that Beast and Iceman go to quite often to hang out with a bunch of weirdos, beatniks and such. And then, so they're all dressed up, getting ready to go out. Like, oh, let's find Scott. So they go into Professor Xavier's office, and dun dun. They're like, oh, Professor X is still here. And they go, dun dun dun. Nope, it's Scott. Oh, Scott's new leader. That's right. Professor Xavier was talking about that the other day. So he's like, hang out with you guys. I got to stay here and do leadership stuff. And they're like, oh, it's shucks, chum. See you later. They all leave. And then Cyclops is just using this thing and listening in. Meanwhile, Magneto is using. Oh, Magneto. There's like more fighting. Mastermind is trying to hit on Scarlet Witch, and then Quicksilver gets involved, and everyone gets involved, and then Magneto's like, "Hey, quit being assholes! I got stuff to do." So he sits down and uses his telekinetic powers, or his telepathic powers, whatever, that he has at this point. The strongest mind in the world outside of Professor Xavier. And he doesn't do it in this one, sorry. He's like, I got stuff to do. So then he goes to the carnival to find the Blob. And he finds the Blob, and he tries to talk to him, and he realizes there's a psionic block on there that Professor X must have put, and he's like, I just have to remind him what to do. And then the Blob is like, leave me alone. And then someone is like, Rube! And then all the circus people come and attack Magneto, but he beats them all. And then at that point, the Blob, he like remembers. He's like, oh yeah, the X-Men, I remember them. I hate those guys. All right, I'll join you, whatever. And it's very similar to the previous story with the Submariner, where he kind of goes back, and then Magneto like sends out a call to Cyclops. Cyclops sends out a call and summons Warren Worthington with his like car phone, which he had in like the 1960s, I guess. And then, the most fantastical thing about this entire story is the fact that in the 1960s or whatever, that Warren Worthington had a car phone. Crazy. I don't know, maybe they had that crap. I had a buddy with a car phone in like the 80s. But anyway. So he goes to get Beast, who's like the new king of the beatniks because he's got big feet. And then Bobby is being like trying to be a playboy, trying to hit on this Zelda girl at the Greenwich Village place they always go hang out with later on. So that's all important stuff later. So they all head back, they change, and they take a helicopter to Magneto's like meetup spot. And when they get there, Magneto... Oh, wait. That was Submariner. Hold on. No, this helicopter's in this one. So yeah, so he tears the helicopter apart. Everybody uses Iceman's slide to get down. Like I said, this is very similar to the Submariner plot, so it's a little jumbled in my brain because I read this thing like yesterday. So they get down and they begin the fight. Oh yeah, when they're fighting the carnival people, all the other evil mutants are there too to help out. Anyway, so they fight, and the Blob makes it tough, but they're able to kind of use their powers, and they go back and forth, and then eventually they're like at another one of like Magneto's like 100 like evil bases that he just has unlimited wealth for, or just the time to like build up. Right, because I guess he can just magnetize whatever he wants. But one of the things is he has these torpedoes, and at some point, the Blob's like fighting all the X-Men, and the Magneto's like, perfect, time to kill them all. And so he shoots all the torpedoes at him, and then all the X-Men duck behind the Blob, and the Blob just like takes it like a champ. And then he survives because he's the Blob, and he's like, the fuck? And Magneto's like, time to escape, do. And they all take off. And then the Blob's like, man, fuck that guy, I'm done. And then the X-Men are like, hey, you should come with us, man. I mean, we tried to do this before, and like, Professor X can help you with your powers, and we can all work together and something. And the Blob's like, you know what? No, I'm not going to join the evil mutants, but I'm not going to join you guys. I just want to be left alone and do my carny shit. And then he meanders off, and Cyclops is like, well, guess that's good. That's that's good enough. Success! We all succeeded without Professor Xavier. High fives all around. So next up we have Eunice. I don't know. He's untouchable apparently, which is true. He's another mutant that the X-Men find. But Professor Xavier's still gone, and we find out he's somewhere in some country in the heart of the Earth looking for Lucifer. I don't think it's the Morning Star Lucifer. But I'm sure we'll find out who this Lucifer fella is. But he's literally Professor Xavier's. He's in a wheelchair, and there's like a lava flow, and we know this because Cyclops contacts him at some point because Beast left the X-Men. Why did Beast leave the X-Men? This is not when he traditionally leaves the X-Men to join the Avengers. This is before that. Him and Iceman are out doing something in Greenwich Village as usual, and this boy needs rescued, so Beast runs up and saves him, and then everyone talks about how they need to get him because he's a mutant.
And Beast had enough. He's done helping humans. So he's not going to go join the mutants, but he's done. So he takes off. And while he's gone, he decides to join the WWE, whatever the local equivalent of that is in New York, which, according to the Marvel Universe, is a very large and successful wrestling program going on. Because this also plays into Spider-Man's whole thing, if you remember, because Spider-Man, that was his whole gig. He's making money being a wrestler before Uncle Ben died in that historic, or that infamous whole arc. Anyway, so he's doing great. He's making money, and then he has to fight Eunice. And Eunice, the untouchable, is untouchable, so Beast tries to fight him and loses. And then he's like, interesting. Then what Beast notices while he's getting beat up by Eunice is that Mastermind's in the audience. And then he eventually finds out that Mastermind is trying to recruit Eunice for the Brotherhood of Dual Mutants. And that Magneto's interested, but that he got burned so bad with the blob. He's like, I don't know, this guy's going to go beat the X-Men first, and then he can come join us. So then Eunice is like, ugh. So then he finds a bank robbery, and he just steals some of their money because they shoot at him, but the bullets aren't going to work. And he's like, maybe I'll just do this. I don't know. And then meanwhile, the X-Men are in the neighborhood to stop the bank robbery, I think, or to do something, I can't remember. And Eunice is like, oh, this is the perfect time for me to beat them. So he starts fighting them, and the X-Men can't do anything to beat him. And they're like, oh, no. And then they somehow... Angel drops him off in the top of the building, and they're like, we'll have to come back and see if we can figure this out later. And they head back to the X-Mansion, and there's Beast, and he's working on a device of some sort. And they're like, hey, what are you doing here? And they have a really awkward conversation that no one gives each other time to explain anything. Specifically, the Beast is just being super sketchy. And so they don't trust him, but then Cyclops' gut instinct trusts him. Anyway, he creates this device to give Eunice, the Untouchable, even more, to make his powers even stronger, even better. And so they go and they run into this guy again, and Beast uses the ray on Eunice. It makes him 10 times more strong, or his powers 10 times stronger. But unfortunately for Eunice, that means that he will literally die. It's the whole, what is it, Midas's golden touch thing, where anything Midas touch turns to gold. So he can't eat or be loved by anyone. So that's the thing with Eunice. His power is so strong now that it pushes everything away. So it's not just things are bouncing off at him. They can't touch him. There's a field of untouchability. And he's like, oh, I'm starving to death. I'm dying. And then the Beast is like, hey, I'll make you a deal. I'll undo what I just did, but you have to promise to never join Magneto and never bother us ever again and just go cheat at wrestling forever. And Eunice is like, all right, that's fine. I'll do that. So he does. And then everyone's like, wow, Cyclops, you trusted Beast this whole time? He's like, I just knew in my heart that I could trust our friend Hank. And Hank's like, thanks, guys. I'm back on the X-Men. Dun, dun, dun.
All right, so now we focus on Lucifer, who's deep under the Balkans. And the geography of this issue calls into question a lot of things. But most of all, just the knowledge of the Marvel writers about geography. Because the X-Men are on a ship traveling to Europe to help Professor Xavier with the Lucifer issue. And we find out Lucifer is the reason why Professor Xavier he can't use his legs. Don't ask any more questions because we get no more answers about why or how or what the point of or anything. We just know that Lucifer is Professor Xavier's greatest enemy, but he's also a human. And the professor is about to reach him to a battle with him or to stop him or to do something. It's very unclear. At the end of the episode, what's going on with that? I mean, it's very important that they went and did what they did, but at the same time, it's almost not important. Anyway, so the whole thing, there's a lot of questions I have about the geographical knowledge of the X-Men writers from this issue. Mostly, okay, so the Balkans are in Central Europe, and then the X-Men are traveling from New York to there via ship, and the ship almost crashes into an iceberg. Thank goodness Cyclops uses his eye ray to blow it up so they can safely travel. Who else is in the Balkans? Not anywhere in the Balkans, just the Balkans, ? The Avengers, because Thor's hammer says they need to be there for some reason. And so the X-Men get a message from Xavier, and he's pretty much like, come, I am fighting Lucifer right now. And Lucifer is the professor's, greatest enemy. This is the second time I recorded this, so hopefully I'm not repeating myself in this shock. But the Lucifer's the reason the Charles lost the use of his legs. I don't think they've called him Charles yet. Anyway, Professor X, Xavier. But we don't know why. We don't know how. We just know that they don't get along. He's also human, which is important because the X-Men don't kill humans. They don't use their powers to kill humans. Only mutants, apparently. So the X-Men are so when the Professor gets down, he essentially beats Lucifer, who uses all sorts of like mechanical devices to trap the Professor, but the Professor's able to break out because he has a gun. And that's it. And he's about to shoot Lucifer and kill him dead with his gun. Literally. About to shoot him and kill him with his gun. When Lucifer's like, oh, but I have a bomb that'll blow up the Antarctica and destroy the whole planet if my heart stops. And the Professor's like, I see. And so he tells the X-Men to stop the Avengers from coming down and fighting Lucifer because he's got to figure out a solution to this problem. And so the X-Men bump into the Avengers because, again, Thor is using Mjolnir to find Lucifer because he's got some premonition powers, I guess, through the hammer that let him know when there's like a danger afoot, like Spider-Man's Sixth Sense, but on a more global scale, maybe? Anyway. So we get a quick intro of the Avengers, and then the X-Men go toe-to-toe with them for a little bit, but they're having a rough go because the Avengers are like, an adult superhero group with like much more experience in life, and the X-Men are like still considered teenagers. But they're able to hold on long enough for the Professor to put Lucifer in like it's not a psychotic, like a, what's his power again? Like a telepathic coma or something? He goes in there and like shuts his brain down, but allowing his heart to work, but doesn't shut it down permanently. He just is like temporarily holding on to his brain so his brain doesn't work right or something. Whatever. Magic. So then he talks to Thor and convinces Thor to let the X-Men come help him and take care of it, and the Avengers can just like skedoodle out of there. So Thor briefs everybody else, and they're like, all right, cool, sounds good. And so they leave. The X-Men head down. They find the Professor and Lucifer unconscious, and he's like, oh, we have to stop this bomb before Lucifer wakes up, because then if he dies, he's going to do something, and, he's a bad guy, so he's going to do it regardless or whatever. His plan is to use it anyway. And so with the Professor and Cyclops are able to harness Cyclops' eye beam and to destroy the fuse of the bomb in like a very precise manner. And right when they do that, Lucifer like wakes up from his like Xavier-induced coma. And then they're like, all right, what are we going to do with this guy? And someone's about to, like, kill him. And then the Professor's like, no, we don't use our powers to kill Homo sapiens. Get out of here, Lucifer. If you ever, I want to let you know that if we ever catch you doing anything like this again, we're going to be very cross with you. And Lucifer's like, oh, man. And just kind of walks out of there. And it's like, the X-Men are triumphant. And my question is, are they, though? This guy literally created a bomb that could destroy the whole world. If you were just like on time, or if anything, like there's a whole emphasis on like this is like the hardest thing. Like the Xavier's had to use like most of his powers, and it was so exhausting, and like the chance that he would fail was so high. And then Cyclops, and so it's a double like, oh, this is such a hard thing. And then they let this guy just like, all right, get out of here, you scamp. Whatever. Goodness. All right. So next, the X-Men go to the Savage Land. What is the Savage Land? Savage Land is in Antarctica, I want to say. And it is, quote-unquote, ruled by Khazar, something like that. And his friend, I forget the name, but it's saber-tooth tiger. And it's one of those, like, the land the world forgot kind of situations. So in the Savage Land, there's dinosaurs, and there's, like, cavemen, and the swamp tribe. And Khazar is... at this point, I can't remember like where he exactly comes from, but he's like a beautiful blonde-haired, like Tarzan-like character with super strength, and he's he talks like like, oh, Khazar is strong, Khazar will win. And then he's got his homie, the saber-tooth tiger, and they like do things, and there's a lot of storylines revolving around the Savage Land, in and out with like different groups. But I can't remember. This is the first time I remember ever reading about it. And since we're just following the X-Men, we're just going to stick around with this the first time it ever showed up. But I can't remember. I think it is more of an X-Men thing than like an Avengers thing or anything else. But so the X-Men come down here in the first place
because they see a news report about Khazar bringing a guy back from like an Antarctic facility, and he's walking around in like the freezing Antarctic cold with just his like loincloth. And they're like, oh, maybe he's a mutant. So they head down there, and they're able to track this guy to the Savage Land. And like, wow, dinosaurs and stuff. That's awesome. And then they get attacked by like the Swamp Tribe, and Jean gets captured. And then Warren Angel was out scouting, and he also got captured separately. So anyway, there's some back and forth with the X-Men and Khazar, but then they kind of like put their grievances behind themselves so they can go fight the Swamp Tribe and rescue Jean. And they keep referring to her as the female because he's like a caveman. Like, please help us rescue our female. Oh, goodness. So then, they travel. Beast, Cyclops, and Iceman travel with Khazar, and they get to the Swamp Tribe, which has this ridiculously giant fortress. And there's like a volcano they're trying to sacrifice Angel and Marvel Girl to. But Marvel Girl's able to untie Angel's bands, and it's actually very smart because at first Angel's like, why don't you just release yourself? And she's like, they put like tar onto the bands, so I can't I'm not strong enough to like pull that apart. And he's like, well, if you didn't do it to me, so do it to me. And she's like freaking out because we're gonna throw us in the lava. And he's like, hey, you gotta focus up, man, you gotta help us out. And she's like, okay. So she releases him, and then they rescue him, and then everyone else shows up, and they fight the Swamp Tribe, and they beat him up real good. And then they're like, hey, Khazar, you want to come with us? He's like, no, I am king here, I will stay. And he like runs off with sabers to Tiger's Throne, and the X-Men are like, okay, that was fun. The end.
All right, so next up we have The Stranger. And this is the end of what I will be referring to as the original Magneto arc, which is the X-Men starting out and dealing with Magneto. And how do they deal with Magneto? Well, they don't. They they kind of putter around. We get introduced to this character called The Stranger, who's from outer space or something. He's from somewhere else. I don't know. It doesn't go into a lot of information about him. He just keeps referring to himself as The Stranger. And The Stranger is a stranger in this place. And we come to learn that his people go, or him specifically maybe, he goes to different planets to find mutations in the local population to take them back to his homeworld or whatever to study them. And because Magneto is very forceful with trying to have the Stranger join him, he's like, all right, I'll take you. And Toad. Bucket. He also turns Mastermind into some sort of living stone-like creature. So that takes care of that. So good job, X-Men. You successfully defeated Magneto and the League of Evil Mutants or whatever they were calling themselves. Not so much you as you just existed and the problem took care of itself. And thus ends Magneto's evil reign. But what will come after him? Oh, we'll find out in the future. But looking back at the whole thing, that's like the story of the whole first arc, is what I'm referring to it as. This guy who like collected gal or whoever collected all these comics and put them in these big files for me to peruse through online. He usually breaks stuff up into little arcs, like the Dark Phoenix Saga, for example, which is like one of the most famous ones for the X-Men. But for the first run, the original run of the X-Men from like the 70s or 60s or whatever, it's just like all of them. But I feel like this is like a turning point, because it's not that things have drastically changed, but they have. And this first arc really establishes a lot of things. It establishes Professor X, the school, the original 5 mutants, the Scott Summers and Jean Grey kind of like crush situation going on. We established Beast as being very smart, despite having like the opposite kind of powers. We don't get too much about Warren Worthington. Bobby Drake goes from being a snowman looking guy to more of like an Iceman looking guy, being called Iceman. We also established him and Beast having like connections to Washington Square, which is where NYU is, which is close to me because I did one of my degrees there. So that's fun. It's a lot of like fun little stuff that it kind of gets established. Where the home of the mansion is in New York and like Westchester County. We established Magneto, who's coming back, obviously, and Mastermind, who's plays a heavy role in the Dark Phoenix Saga. Toad's on and off, in and out. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who become very like front and center members of the Avengers at some point. I mean, they get introduced here, and they get involved. And like when the rest of Magneto's crew pieces out, the X-Men once again invite them to come join them And Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are like, no, we're gonna go. Well, mostly Quicksilver is like, no, we're gonna go do our own thing. Leave us alone. We won't bother you. You don't bother us. And they're like, all right, good enough. That's really the theme of this first arc. It's the X-Men find an opponent. They go fight that opponent. They usually come to a standstill, and then either something miraculous happens, or the enemy pieces out, or Professor X kind of bails them out, or whatever. They don't really do too much beating anybody. More just kind of like, aha, we're here. We'll fight. All right, we're gonna run away. So cool. We'll see if that changes. I don't think it does. It's been a long time since I read through these, but anyway, I really enjoyed it. It's really good. Again, it establishes a lot of like the X-Men stuff that is very long lasting, and Cerebro, kind of the main cast, Professor X, him being kind of like a douche nozzle. The interesting thing that gets dropped, because I don't remember Magneto having like super sonic powers later on, but in this first arc, he's able to like astral project, and they keep referring to him as the second greatest mind outside of Professor X, and he has magnetic powers. Magnetic powers really function like magic as well, and that kind of gets more refined as we go on. Let me think. Yeah, and Jean Grey gets more telepathic kind of like powers as well as time goes on. Iceman's already demonstrating that he is the best. He's the most powerful of all the X-Men. It's not, no one's really talking about it, but you can. It's like it's like the Green Lantern. Essentially, he just like wills something to be, and it exists. He's like, oh, we're gonna do this, and any time there's like an issue, it's like Iceman does this, and it solves the problem. And it's like, well, yeah, because he can turn anything to ice. And when you start expanding upon this concept, it's like, well, that includes like a lot of stuff. Like, you can freeze the blood of a human being and kill them instantly. Anyway, I don't know if it ever gets into that dark land, but maybe it does. Coolio. Well, that was fun, and so we'll move on. Catch y'all later.